December 31, 2006. A wire transfer cleared quietly. $83 million moved from the British Treasury to the United States. No parade, no headline, no history book mentioned it. Most people believe Britain won World War II. They believe victory ended the story. They believe war destroys empires. That payment tells a different story. It was the final installment of a debt that began in 1941. A debt older than most people alive today, a debt that lasted 65 years after the war ended. Here is the contradiction. Britain was America's ally. Britain was also America's debtor. This is not what they teach you. We are taught that empires fall from invasion, from fire, from armies at the gate, from flags pulled down, but history shows something colder, something quieter. Empires collapse from debt, long before the last battle, long before the public notices. War is only the trigger, debt is the mechanism, and today you are going to see how it actually worked. Not yet. But by the end of this story, you will never look at victory the same way again, because every empire that ever collapsed believed the same thing. That borrowing was temporary, that power could outlast interest, that the bill could always be paid later. It never was, it never could be, and it never will be. Let's go back not to a battlefield, but to a ledger. In the year 117 AD, Rome stood at its peak. It ruled over 60 million people. That was nearly 1/4 of the world's population. Its legions were undefeated, its roads were unmatched, its economy was the most advanced system on earth. Rome did not fall that year. Rome began to borrow. At first, the borrowing was invisible. The emperors needed money to pay soldiers, to build monuments, to secure loyalty. Taxes were politically dangerous, so Rome chose another path. They debased the currency. Silver coins began to contain less silver. The face value stayed the same. The metal value did not. This was not called inflation. It was called necessity. Soldiers were paid with cheaper coins. Suppliers were forced to accept them. Prices quietly rose. Rome told its citizens nothing had changed, but trust had changed. This is how debt enters an empire, not through loans at first, but through promises that cannot be kept. As Rome expanded, costs expanded faster. More borders meant more soldiers meant more pay meant more debasement. By the 3rd century, Roman coins contained less than 5% silver, the rest was copper. Money became symbolic, trade collapsed. People demanded goods instead of currency. Taxes were paid in grain, soldiers were paid in land. Rome still had armies, but it no longer had money. The empire did not fall in a single moment, it hollowed out. Civil wars exploded, generals fought over shrinking resources. Each new ruler promised stability, each one borrowed more. Rome was not conquered by barbarians. It was dismantled by arithmetic. Now jump forward, the year is 1694. England is at war with France. The crown is nearly bankrupt, taxes are maxed out, gold reserves are thin. Then comes an innovation, the Bank of England. It was not created to stabilize the economy. It was created to finance war. Private bankers loaned money to the government. In return, they received guaranteed interest, paid by taxpayers. This was revolutionary. For the first time, a nation could fight wars without immediate resources. Debt became a weapon. England could now outspend rivals. Not because it was richer, but because it could borrow longer. This model worked at first. Britain defeated France, it built the largest empire in history, it controlled trade routes, it controlled seas, it controlled money, but every loan had interest, every war added layers. By the early 20th century, Britain was drowning in obligations. Still powerful, still respected, still fragile. Then came 1914. World War I did not destroy Britain, debt did. Britain borrowed heavily from the United States. Gold flowed out. Liabilities flowed in. After the war, Britain was technically victorious. But financially broken, the empire survived on credit, colonies were exploited harder, taxes increased, austerity followed. Then came World War II. Again, Britain fought for survival. Again, Britain borrowed. This time the debt was formalized, lend-lease. America supplied weapons, food, fuel. It was called aid. It was structured as debt. Britain paid for those supplies until 2006. Victory came in 1945. Bankruptcy came with it. The empire dissolved not from invasion but from repayment schedules. Now pause here, notice the pattern. Rome, Britain, different eras, same mechanism. Expansion creates costs, costs exceed revenue, debt fills the gap, debt compounds. Control shifts. Empires do not fall when they lose wars, they fall when creditors replace enemies. The creditor does not need armies, interest does the work, and this pattern did not end in the past, it evolved. After World War II, the United States inherited the system, not by conquest, but by financing. The dollar became the reserve currency not because of trust but because of debt. Bretton Woods locked the system in place. Other nations held dollars. America held power. This looked stable. It looked permanent. It never is because reserve status creates temptation, the ability to borrow endlessly. The belief that demand will never stop. Rome believed that. Britain believed that. Now the question becomes uncomfortable. What happens when debt replaces productivity? When interest replaces growth? When empires fund themselves by issuing promises instead of creating value? We are not there yet in this story. But we are close. In the next part, we will trace how debt moves from tool to trap, how rising empires normalize borrowing, how warning signs are ignored, how the breaking point arrives quietly, and why failed fixes always make things worse. Before we continue, tell me one thing. The transition from tool to trap always looks harmless at first. Debt begins as flexibility. It buys time, it smooths shocks, it allows expansion before revenue arrives. Every rising empire tells itself the same story. We will pay it back later. Growth will cover it. Our power makes us different. This is where the system turns because debt does not stay still, it compounds, and compounding changes behavior. Let's return to Rome for a moment. By the 4th century, emperors no longer asked whether they should spend. They asked how to fund spending without revolt. Raising taxes caused riots, reducing armies invited invasion. So Rome chose the only path left: more currency manipulation, more forced loans, more promises. Landowners were required to supply soldiers, merchants were forced to accept state prices. Guilds were locked into professions by law, debt turned into control, the empire became rigid, innovation slowed, trust vanished. This is a critical moment most history books skip. Empires do not collapse when debt becomes large, they collapse when debt changes incentives, when survival depends on borrowing. When policy serves creditors, when flexibility disappears. Rome crossed that line, now jump forward again. The British Empire followed the same arc. During its rise, debt funded dominance. Navies were built before trade profits arrived. Wars were fought before taxes were collected. Credit allowed Britain to move faster than rivals. But by the late 1800s, something shifted. Interest payments became permanent, a fixed cost. A growing share of government revenue went to servicing old wars, not building new capacity. This is the moment empires become brittle, when income grows slower than obligations. Britain entered World War I already weakened. Not militarily, financially. The war multiplied debt, the empire survived, the balance sheet did not. After the war, Britain attempted fixes, they raised taxes, they cut spending, they returned to the gold standard. Each fix worsened the problem, higher taxes slowed growth, austerity reduced demand, gold constrained flexibility, debt remained. The economy shrank around it. This is another pattern. Empires respond to debt crises by protecting the system that created them, not by changing it, because change threatens power. Now look at the aftermath of World War II. Britain lost reserve currency status. The pound declined, the dollar rose. This was not accidental, it was arithmetic. The country with the cleanest balance sheet wins, not the biggest army. America emerged with factories intact, gold reserves full, creditors everywhere. The system reset around the United States, but the mechanism stayed the same: debt-funded influence. Influence created dependency. Dependency reinforced control. This was cleaner than empire. No colonies, no governors, just balance sheets. Loans replaced legions. Institutions replaced armies. The International Monetary Fund, the World Bank, development loans. They promised stability. They delivered structure. Countries borrowed to develop. They paid interest forever. Currencies weakened. Assets transferred. Policy choices narrowed. This was not conspiracy. It was design. A system where debt enforces behavior without violence. Now here is the uncomfortable truth. The United States did not break the cycle, it inherited it. For decades, the dollar's position masked the problem. Foreign demand absorbed deficits. Interest rates stayed low, debt did not feel dangerous, but history shows something precise. No reserve currency lasts forever, not because of rivals, but because of internal incentives. Reserve status encourages borrowing, borrowing delays reform. Delayed reform accelerates decline. Rome debased, Britain borrowed, America prints, different tools, same outcome. Now let's talk about the breaking point. The breaking point is never obvious. It does not arrive with collapse headlines, it arrives quietly. Interest payments exceed military spending, productive investment falls, speculation rises, debt grows faster than GDP. This is the danger zone. In Rome, it showed up as barter replacing money. In Britain, it showed up as colonial liquidation. In modern systems, it shows up as asset bubbles. Stocks rise, housing rises, real wages stagnate, debt flows into financial markets, not productive capacity. This is not growth, it is distortion. When debt fuels consumption instead of creation, the system hollow outs. Now consider this. The United States crossed a historic threshold in the 2020s. Interest payments on national debt began rivaling defense spending. This has happened before, every time. At this stage, governments face impossible choices. Cut spending and trigger recession. Raise taxes and trigger backlash. Print money and trigger inflation. Every option has consequences. Empires choose the least visible one, inflation, because inflation delays blame, it spreads pain, it hides extraction. Rome debased coins, Britain inflated postwar, modern systems expand balance sheets, different language. Same effect, purchasing power falls, savings erode, debt becomes manageable, trust declines. This is the quiet unraveling. Now let's address a myth. Many people believe collapse happens when debt becomes too high. That is wrong. Collapse happens when confidence breaks, when lenders question repayment, when citizens reject currency, when policy credibility evaporates. This is psychological, not mathematical. Rome's soldiers demanded land, not coins. Britain's creditors demanded dollars, not pounds. Confidence shifted, power followed. The fallout phase always looks chaotic. Political polarization rises, social unrest increases, radical movements gain traction. Why? Because debt concentrates pain at the bottom while protecting the top. Elites are insulated, assets rise with inflation, debtors benefit, wage earners lose. This creates moral fracture. The empire no longer feels legitimate. This is where wars often appear, not as cause but as distraction. Wars redirect anger outward. They justify spending, they unify temporarily, but they do not solve debt, they accelerate it. Now comes the final illusion, the belief that fixes will work. Every empire tries the same fixes: restructuring, austerity, monetary resets, new institutions. Rome tried price controls, Britain tried gold. Modern systems try rate hikes. These are patches, they treat symptoms, not structure. Because the structure is based on perpetual growth, on infinite borrowing, on confidence that must never break. History says it always does, not suddenly. Then suddenly, we are now approaching the final sections of this story. In the next part, we will connect these patterns directly to today. We will look at modern debt numbers, behavioral signals, policy contradictions. Then we will end with 3 clear lessons history keeps repeating, and one warning that matters more than any statistic. Look closely at the present moment. Not at headlines, not at markets, at structure, because the structure always reveals the future before events do. Global debt today is higher than at any point in human history. Public debt, private debt, corporate debt, household debt, all at once. This is not normal, and it is not accidental. Modern economies are built on credit expansion. Growth is expected to outpace interest. That assumption underpins everything. But history warns us about this exact moment. When debt growth outpaces real productivity, empires enter the danger phase. Let's examine the signals. Governments now refinance old debt with new debt. They do not pay it down, they roll it forward. This works only while confidence remains. Central banks promise stability, then they reverse policy under pressure. Rates rise to fight inflation, then rates fall to protect debt markets. This contradiction is not a mistake, it is a trap. High rates expose insolvency. Low rates fuel inflation. There is no painless option. Rome faced this. So did Britain. Now look at behavior. Speculation dominates investment. Capital chases assets, not factories. Housing becomes unaffordable. Stocks detach from earnings. This is late-stage debt behavior. The system feeds itself. Debt inflates asset values. Rising assets justify more debt. The cycle accelerates until it doesn't. Now consider geopolitics. Trade tensions rise, currency wars intensify, sanctions replace diplomacy. These are not causes, they are symptoms. When financial dominance weakens, force replaces trust. Empires do not become aggressive because they are strong. They become aggressive because they are cornered. History confirms this. Spain in the 1600s, Britain in the early 1900s, Rome in its final centuries. External conflict masks internal decay. Now here is the most dangerous belief of all, that this time is different. Technology changes nothing about debt math. Complexity hides fragility, speed amplifies collapse. The modern system is faster, more leveraged, more interconnected. That means corrections travel instantly. There is no slow decline anymore, only delayed recognition. Now let's talk about what usually happens next. The breaking point does not arrive as default, it arrives as policy shift. A new rule, a new tax, a new restriction, capital controls, wealth taxes, forced conversions. These measures are framed as fairness or emergency or stability, but they all serve the same purpose, to keep debt service alive. Rome forced professions to stay put. Britain seized colonial assets. Modern states redefine ownership. Debt demands compliance. Now here is where history gets uncomfortable. Empires rarely warn citizens. They normalize the decline. Inflation is called transitory. Debt is called manageable. Decline is called rebalancing. Language softens reality. By the time people feel it, choices are gone. Savings are diluted, purchasing power eroded, opportunities shrink. This is why economic history is rarely taught honestly, because it exposes patterns that undermine confidence. And confidence is the system. Now let's connect the final dots. War does not collapse empires, it exposes financial weakness. Debt does not grow because of war, war grows because of debt. When systems cannot self-correct, they externalize pressure. Conflict delays reckoning, it does not cancel it. Rome fought civil wars for decades. Britain fought 2 world wars, each war accelerated the financial transfer. Now comes the handoff. As one empire weakens, another absorbs influence. Not through conquest, through credit, the creditor becomes the center. This transition feels peaceful until it is complete. Then the old power wakes up poorer, dependent, resentful. This is not collapse as explosion, it is collapse as replacement. And replacement is invisible to those living through it. Now let's bring this to the present. The world is fragmenting financially. Reserve diversification is rising, trust is thinning. This does not mean immediate collapse, it means the cycle is advancing. Debt has moved from tool to constraint. From advantage to liability. History tells us what happens next, not tomorrow, not next year, but eventually. Now it is time to close this story with clarity. Here are the 3 lessons every empire learns too late. First, debt always outlives war, victories end, interest does not. Second, control shifts from armies to creditors long before collapse is visible. Third, confidence once broken cannot be legislated back. And here is the warning. If you believe empires fall when flags come down, you will miss the collapse entirely. Because by the time symbols change, power already has. The real collapse happens in spreadsheets, in policy meetings, in debt auctions no one watches. And when the public finally notices the system has already moved on, this is not about fear, it is about awareness. Economic history is not past tense, it is a loop. And every generation believes it will break the cycle. None have yet. If you want to understand power, do not watch battles, watch balance sheets. If you want to understand collapse, do not wait for chaos, look for debt. And if you want to stay ahead of the story, learn what history keeps repeating. If this changed how you see empires, stay here, because this channel does not explain finance, it decodes it. There is one final illusion every empire clings to. The belief that reform will arrive in time, that smarter policy, better leaders, or new tools will reverse the math. History is unforgiving on this point. Reform only works before debt becomes structural. After that moment, reform threatens survival. Rome understood this too late. When Emperor Diocletian took power in the late 3rd century, the empire was already fractured. Revenues were unstable. Inflation was rampant. Trust in money was gone. His solution was control. He froze prices. He fixed wages. He bound workers to their jobs. He tried to force stability. The result was collapse of trade. Merchants stopped selling, farmers hid production, markets went underground, the system suffocated itself. Britain followed a softer version. After World War II, it chose managed decline, it dismantled the empire, it accepted reduced power, it protected social stability. This worked better. But it still meant surrendering dominance. Not all empires choose this path, some double down, they centralize authority, they expand surveillance, they politicize finance. These are not signs of strength, they are signs of constraint because debt removes freedom. Now bring this forward, modern states face the same fork. Accept lower living standards slowly, or attempt to preserve them through financial engineering. Financial engineering always wins politically, until it fails economically. This is where the cycle tightens, central banks lose independence, policy becomes reactive, credibility erodes, markets stop trusting guidance, volatility replaces stability, the system becomes reflexive. Now understand this clearly. Collapse is not a single event. It is a series of thresholds, each crossed quietly. First, debt stops being temporary. Second, debt stops being manageable. Third, debt stops being trusted. Only the third triggers visible change. Everything before it is normalization. This is why people are always shocked. Now let's end with the promised clarity. 3 takeaways. First takeaway, empires fall financially before they fall politically. By the time leadership changes, wealth already has. Second takeaway, debt is not just an economic issue, it is a power structure. Whoever controls credit controls